This episode is brought to you by Lexham Press, who publishes books that love the Word, love the faith, and love the church. Lexham Press was recently acquired by Baker Publishing Group, and there will be more news to follow. Our July book of the month is The Culture of God's Word, Faithful Ministry in a Post-Christian Society. You can receive a 30% discount on this title and all previous books of the month by visiting bakerbookhouse.com/pages/Mere Fidelity. You can find that link in our show notes to get 30% off of our book of the month from Lexham Press.
You are listening to another episode of Mere Fidelity. My name is Matthew Lee Anderson. I'm your host for the show. All right, we're going to roll into this. I've got Derek and Alastair with me today, and we're delighted to have a special guest, Dr. Yoram Hazony. He's a Bible scholar, political philosopher. He's the president of the Herzl Institute in Jerusalem, chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation, who employs, or I think has employed at some point, our good friend of the show, Brad Littlejohn, someone whom we love. Dr. Hazony is the author of several books, including The Philosophy of Hebrew Scriptures, which is, I think, a really fascinating book. And I originally wanted to have Dr. Hazony on to talk about that one because I think it's just such an interesting way of reading the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. But he's the author most recently of Conservatism, a Rediscovery. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Dr. Hazony, thanks for joining us. We are delighted to have you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So conservatism, a rediscovery. I just lay it out for our readers. Give us the standard sales pitch. What is in need of rediscovery, right? Like, where did conservatism go that it got lost, that it has to be refound? And what sort of framework are you looking to defend within this book?
Well, there's been a lot of activity on the political ideas landscape recently. If we take a look at the year 2020, I think that it will turn out to have been a watershed moment in the history of America and Britain and all of the democratic nations. The reason it's a watershed moment is because the hegemonic, the dominant ideas, which can be called Enlightenment Liberalism, which had dominated the politics, the public life of just about all political parties in American Europe since the 1960s at least. That dominance, that hegemony was shattered and replaced, as everybody, I think almost everybody now understands, by a new worldview, which you can call woke Neo-Marxism, you can call it other things, but everybody understands that it's not the same as the old Enlightenment liberalism. And in the midst of this bid by woke Neo-Marxism to seize control of the public philosophy, the public religion of the English-speaking nations and the Western nations, there is a renewed need to ask the question, what are the alternatives? On the far right, there's all sorts of characters who are preaching, not unsuccessfully among the young, saying, look, Christianity has failed, the Bible has failed, the American Constitution has failed, the Anglo-American tradition has failed, and what we really need is dictatorship. And each of these personalities has a different way of explaining why we need dictatorship. But the bottom line is the total failure of the tradition that gave birth and life to America and Britain and so on. And I wrote the book Conservatism, a Rediscovery in order to propose something different, which is not liberalism and is not woke Neo-Marxism and is not any of these strange new far-right concoctions, but is actually, in fact, the conservative tradition of the English-speaking world, which has been ignored for the most part in academia for generations, and is taught in very few places. It's a tradition which is based in the Bible, traces its lineage up through the common law, and a series of great political thinkers and rulers in Britain, and then up through the Federalist Party at the American founding, which is the conservative party during the American Revolution. My book comes to claim that rather than giving in to the woke neo-Marxist tide, which we can see coming, or to any of these other new concoctions, there is a case to be made, I think a very strong case, for restoring earlier traditions that are religious and political and native to Britain and America.
Good. That's helpful. So there's a lot of moves you make in this book that I am very interested in. I think, I mean, just personally, this is the sort of project that I'm deeply sympathetic to. I think instinctively would have embraced without reservation, probably prior to 2020, prior to 2016, especially. But now I think I wonder a little bit about certain features of it, and I'd love to just ask you some of this. So to in terms of thinking about the therapeutic for our time, G.K. Chesterton is someone who I read a lot and have enjoyed. He's shaped my thinking a lot. And I've been thinking a lot about a talk that he gave actually somewhat later in his career. He was invited to give a commencement address at the Slade School of Art, where he was a graduate of. And it's a really fascinating talk because he goes in and effectively says what they need is liberalism. What they need is an account of the individual that transcends the commodification of the person, the standardization by a low standard, he calls it, but that transcends the sort of like environment of time. And partly he's worried about a kind of left liberalism that's being too coercive in its norms, too demanding, too restrictive on individuals, and he sees some sort of need for a kind of individualism. I guess I wonder, within the sort of story that you tell about the rise of woke Marxism, why is a renewed individualism or type of liberalism, why is that not the right antidote for our time?
Well, we tried that experiment. Beginning in the 1940s, the intellectuals and political leadership in America and in the rest of the Western world after World War II did exactly what you just suggested. They imposed an Enlightenment liberal political theory, rejecting any other aspects of Anglo-American tradition. They banned God and prayer and Bible from the schools and set pornography loose on the country and loosened the legal constraints on abortion and divorce and all sorts of other non-traditional sexual behaviors, and they let the schizophrenics out of the mental hospitals because of individual liberties that at this point were supposed to be the answer to all questions. That they set out to extend a universal liberal order over the entire globe, and were even willing to go to repeatedly to go to war for it. They did all these things, and what happened? What happened is that the thing hollowed itself out. The political and religious traditions, which had previously held Enlightenment liberalism in check, in a kind of balance, were erased and destroyed, and most people can't even identify them anymore. And so we have what we have. We have a woke neo-Marxism, which has knocked over liberalism, like a house of cards. And people who think that Enlightenment liberalism is the answer to woke neo-Marxism, when Enlightenment liberalism is precisely what caused neo-Marxism. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah,
that seems to me to be a complete fantasy.
so I think that's right. I agree with all that. I think that story is exactly right. And I'm opposed to all of those things as well. I think my question is something like, do you think that there's only one form of liberalism? Is Enlightenment liberalism the only option? Or are there forms of liberalism that are non-Enlightenment types of liberalism? Like, is it, and even within Enlightenment liberalism, how many different types of liberalism are there? Because it seems like there's a kind of contest there that went on, and one form certainly won, but it doesn't seem like it had to have gone that way, does it?
No, of course it didn't have. No, it didn't have to go that way. I don't. I don't have a theory of the inevitable consequences of some idea. I do basically believe that human beings are capable of repenting and restoring and revising and improving. They often don't do it, but they're capable of it. So let me define Enlightenment liberalism as I'm using it, and then we'll go to your question about what other kinds of liberalism could there be. So to begin with, when I say Enlightenment liberalism, I'm talking about the liberalism that's descended from the rationalist Enlightenment thinkers, Hobbes, Locke, Spinoza, Rousseau of the social contract, Kant, and then going forward from there. I think it's fair, as I write in the book, to describe that set of thinkers as together advancing a worldview which is based first on the assumption of the perfect equality and the perfect liberty of all human beings by nature. Second, the view of moral and political obligation as arising only from consent. And finally, a belief in universal reason, a belief that if you just suppress all the inherited traditions and let people think freely instead of in traditional ways, then they will all quickly approach some kind of a consensus about the true political and moral order, which is, of course, the political and moral order that these thinkers propose. Now, the reason to care about these thinkers is because after World War II, their worldview, their system, these premises was taken to be the necessary and sufficient condition for establishing a good and a just political order, not just in America and Europe, but everywhere in the world. There's lots of reasons to think that was a mistake. And in academia, there have been, I assume that that's what's leading to this question. In academia, there have been, since the late 1980s, 1990s, there's been a very widespread feeling among academic political theorists of liberalism, people who are committed to liberalism. There's been a widespread sense that Enlightenment liberalism has really failed. It's not realistic. It blinds you to all sorts of aspects of reality, and you just got to get rid of those initial presumptions. Yeah. Richard Rorty once famously described this as we used Enlightenment liberalism to climb up the ladder. We got in the window. Now we can throw the ladder away. The question is whether that's true. I mean, many of the things that academic philosophers of liberalism have been writing against Enlightenment liberalism, I'm very sympathetic to. And a lot of times when I'm reading it, I feel like, whoa, these guys are, they're like bordering on moving into conservatism. They're being so reasonable and realistic. But I think that the bottom line is that in all my conversations with my academic liberal political theorist friends, they're never actually willing to give up on those first two axioms. They are willing to give up on universal reason, but the idea that the individual has to be treated as free and equal, and the idea that that freedom and equality is expressed by obligations that essentially are adopted by consent. There's all sorts of tinkering with it, but there's no real change. So they'll tell you, look, Yoram, you're right. We got rid of the metaphysics. We got rid of the ladder, but they're not willing to do what a conservative would do. And so let me tell you what a conservative does. A conservative starts in a different place. A conservative may have great respect and cherish and believe in individual liberties, but a conservative begins with the question, what needs to be done in order that my family, my tribe, my nation, the group that I'm loyal to, my religion, what needs to be done in order to make sure that my nation is strengthened and in such a way that is capable of propagating through time. And that is a question that liberals simply cannot, and they can't answer. They don't have the tools in their tradition to answer it. If they were asking that question, then they would become conservatives. But they don't want to answer that question, because answering that question immediately puts you in tension with the assumptions of individual liberty as the highest good and equality and consent.
You've spoken about the importance of the Anglo-American tradition for conservatism. And it seems here that we need to be clear about how certain terms are functioning, because it would be very easy to equivocate. So when we're talking about conservatism, you can maybe think about that as a sort of personal disposition towards the preservation of specific goods within your culture, your family context, etc. Or you could talk about it as a very specific historical tradition of thought in the Anglo-American tradition, for instance. Or we might talk about it as a more general ideology. And so I'd be interested to hear you tease out a bit how you're using the term, how you see it in relationship to the very specificity of its historical origins as a intellectual movement. To what extent is this something that can be transplanted to some country that has no relationship to the Anglo-American tradition? To what extent is it something that can be challenged by the empirical forms of life that exist in other contexts that are not conservative, but are nonetheless working with deep traditions that have operated over time? And so questions of the cultural contingency of the conservative position, I think, are important ones. And I'd be interested to hear how you see, how you define conservatism relative to the particularity of its origins.
Well, as I said, conservatism is a view that begins with the religious and national traditions of the nation or of the tribe as being the key to maintaining it and sustaining it and strengthening it through time over generations. So that definition already means that conservatism is not like liberalism, or at least Enlightenment liberalism. It's not like Marxism, in that it does not describe a universal doctrine. Every tribe and every nation is going to have a somewhat different tradition that it's inheriting. So in my book, I'm specifically talking about the conservative tradition in Britain and in America. And that's not to say that there aren't other conservative traditions in Germany or Russia or India or Arabia, but the most influential such tradition in our world certainly is the British and American one. And now, you asked a lot of questions, so let me. Let me try to replay that recording and see if I can.
It's pretty common with Alastair. You just got Alastair, actually.
So look. Yes. To begin with, conservatism is definitely much less prescriptive with regard to the rest of the world than liberalism and Marxism. On the other hand, I think I would not go to the opposite extreme and say that conservatism is a disposition, because conservatism is a tradition of ideas, and many people of all sorts of dispositions have taken up those ideas over the course of centuries. And in my book, I begin with John Fortescue, because his in praise of the Laws of England is a short, clear, resoundingly intelligent book that, in the 1400s already describes much of what we call conservatism today. And I think people should read it. So I go from Fortescue and Hooker to John Selden and the resistance to Stuart authoritarianism, and from there to Clarendon, Hale, Burke. I skipped Blackstone. We could throw in Montesquieu. That's an English tradition, and then I make the argument that the American Federalists restored that tradition in many of its most significant parts with the restoration of 1787, which was the establishment of a constitution, creating a national American government in the image of the national British government. I don't think that this has much to do with personal dispositions. The reason I say that is because there are countless people who I've met in my life who have started out as liberals or Marxists and have ended up, for various reasons, deciding that they need to become conservatives. And these people have very different dispositions. I mean, even among my children, we have 9 children, thank God. My children have very, very different dispositions. And some of them are, they're loyalists and they just love doing whatever it is that their parents are doing. And some of them are rebels, and they find that they're being oppressed if they're asked to do something the way their parents do it, and they need to find a completely different path. But they also often come back to conservatism in the end. So I think the right way to look at it is as a tradition of political and religious ideas. That tradition, like all traditions, it can influence other nations. I mean, just if this English tradition I'm talking about, it did not invent the stock market. The stock market was invented by the Dutch, and the entire mercantile law was brought into the English common law courts from the Low Countries and from Italy, because the British saw that those countries were becoming powerful financially and able to fund wars and other things that the British wanted to fund. So they incorporated these things. Burke himself writes specifically about, and as does Selden, about the need to repair traditions that you've received. And the repair of traditions means that you go back to things that were used to work in your own country, in your own traditions. But if you don't have that, they agree that you need to look at things that work in other countries. And Burke specifically praises the Polish Revolution at about the time of the French Revolution. He praises the Polish Revolution because the Poles, he thought, had a dysfunctional constitution, and their reform brought it more in line with the British Constitution, which they were imitating because it worked. So I think disposition is really the wrong way to go. I think we should look at it as a tradition of ideas. It can be adopted by other countries, but always with great difficulty.
Dr. Hazony, thank you again for the book. It was very stimulating. I thought so much of the historic retelling, as a kid who, got his American founding history in our American high schools, it's just a different lens on who the founders were in terms of the liberal tradition, conservative tradition, all that sort of thing. I did have some questions about the conservative paradigm. A lot of it made instinctive sense about the way that we, especially the element about the way that we think. I'm a Calvinist, and so when you tell me that people are far more perverse than they like to think that they are in the way that they reason, and far more self-interested, I'm like, yes, preach, this is good. you're self-interested, listen to God, and know yourself. And so that is very intuitive to me. The question I have, though, is, again, and it's one you did anticipate, and you did get into a bit, is the question of the potential relativism of the conservative tradition, as a lot of it has to do with transmitting and passing on customs, our instincts, instinctive ways of viewing the world as what is right and good for local peoples. So it's anti-totalitarian in some senses, in that we're not saying, hey, the way that we figured out how to live life in Orange County is how all of the United States should live.
Thanks be to God.
And that's right, and that makes sense. Nobody else has our weather, but the other element of it is the way that maybe bumps up against the grain of this other strand in scriptural thought. Like and even traditional thought around natural law, and the way that the universality of Scripture's claims press against fallen local customs and norms, and the way that sometimes things that are, hey, we're going to humbly let those people over there live the way they live, and us the way we live, and this is what our fathers did, and this is what you will do, hopefully. I'm wondering how you would answer the question. The Scripture itself actually has some, I don't want to say progressive or revolutionary tendencies in it, but it has, there's polemic against the gods of the nations. It's polemic against the ways of the pagans. It's polemic against the ways of all of these peoples. Yeah, it only happens locally in Israel, but there's an implied critique that the way their fathers taught them to live was futile and wrong and contrary to the God of Israel. And so I'm wondering if
Jonah goes to Nineveh, not only in Israel, he goes to Nineveh.
Amos prophesies against some of the local neighboring nations, and there's prophecies against Babylon and Egypt. And you should have known better than to treat Israel this way. And so I'm wondering how you reconcile those tensions with potential tensions within the conservative tradition as being more empirical and allegedly more humble and that sort of thing. So again, very sympathetic, but I'd love to hear you answer that.
I think that the conservative tradition that we're talking about inherits the same tensions that already exist in the Bible, and I think you're describing them very well. The ancient Near East has plenty of experience with empires that where the king is commanded by the god, go out and conquer the four corners of the earth in order to establish the reign of peace and economic prosperity on earth. Despite all of their differences, I think you can find that imperial ideology in the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Persians, and then it's inherited by the Greeks and the Romans, and continues to this day. The belief that conquering all the peoples that you can in order to eliminate borders for the sake of peace and economic prosperity is a powerful tradition, international tradition among all of the peoples that that we're familiar with. It's well known. And as you say, the Bible is a rebellion against. When I say the Bible, I'm speaking about the Hebrew Bible. I don't pretend to be an expert in New Testament, and my Christian friends are kind of divided on about to what extent the New Testament is continuing the Hebrew Bible or not. And I'm not going to solve that problem today.
I'm a Presbyterian. I think they're hand in glove. So proceed.
If they're hand in glove, then I think we ought to be able to see the Bible as a rebellion against the teaching of these empires on a number of different levels. And you're correct that one way in which the Bible is a rebellion against these theories is that it does obviously discover a universal God, creator of heaven and earth, who does establish some kind of law that is applicable to all human beings. in Scripture. And I mean, it's not quite as simple as that, but I think that interpretation is correct. That that when Moses brings the Israelites to Mount Sinai, there are non-Jews among them, and there isn't any question that the law is speaking to everyone who's standing there, and that Moses himself tells us that this law is this law is your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the nations, who will come forward and see the laws and say, look, this is fantastic. We can learn from these laws. And it's almost universal throughout the prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, for sure, Ezekiel, the idea that at some future point, nations from all over the world will say, the stuff we got from our forefathers didn't work, and we're going to go to Jerusalem. We're going to learn from them. So all of that is there. It's real. It's fundamental. I should add that God judges according to this universal law. God destroys Sodom off the face of the earth without any indication, that anybody showed up at Sodom in advance and said, "Listen, fellas, here's the word from God. Do this or else." We get that in the book of Jonah. We get the idea that that even an empire as evil as the Assyrians has the possibility of repentance if they come to the one God. So I'm with you on all of that, and yet at the same time, part of the rebellion is against the idea that any one nation has a mission or a calling to go and conquer everybody else in the world and impose their view of things. And this begins very early on in the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, where God, creator of heaven and earth, tells Moses, here are your borders, and you're not allowed to cross them, and you're not allowed to trouble the neighbors. And so this is the first text, as far as I know, that we have in recorded history in which the God of a people, instead of sending the people out to conquer the world, tells them, no, I'll punish you if you cross this line. And in the early modern period, when the law of nations is being rebooted, the scholars of the 1600s have to turn to biblical precedents, Talmudic also, but to biblical precedents in order to establish the rightness of borders, of authoritative borders between countries, because of course the Romans didn't recognize such borders. So both things are there, and I think that that those people who read the Bible both as saying, look, there is a fundamental moral minimum that God wants from you, and if not, he's going to come and destroy you. On the one hand. And on the other hand, that's not up to us. It's not our job to go out and conquer the neighbors. Our job is to try to whatever extent possible, to lift ourselves up so that we can serve as an example for other nations. If they decide that they're going to come and learn from us, that's, God would love that. If we go out and force them to convert to Judaism, I'm not sure God would like that at all.
Seems to me that one of the challenges that conservatives really face in the current context is the dramatically transformed character of our lives as a result of modern technology and other such developments. So we can talk about the boundaries between nations, but those function very differently when we can travel around the world in a day, or we can contact someone in Australia within a couple of minutes. The sorts of boundaries that you would have, for instance, the natural boundary of the Atlantic Ocean that would enable people to cross over and really become a new sort of people, no longer functions when you have that sort of ease of transport, ease of communication, and also economy. The degree to which the patterns of the economy are globalized and powers become uprooted from any particular nation or any particular locality even, and become spread over. To what extent does a logic of nations function within the world of the internet, of the global economy? To what extent is this a sort of reversion to a world that was easier, that is an imaginative return to something that is no longer workable. How can we have a sort of conservatism that works in the 21st century?
I think conservatism works just like it always did. I mean, I don't. I'm familiar with the technological changes that you're describing, Alastair, but I don't. I really do not know for sure how much of a change there's been. I mean, I can certainly believe that there's much greater anxiety and mental illness and general lack of health because of the fact that people spent for the last 10 years have spent so much of their time looking at their iPhones. But the fundamental characteristics of human politics that I describe in my books, I don't think they've changed at all. Human beings are still fundamentally sticky. They extend their egos in order and develop mutual loyalties that create families and tribes and nations. And we still live in physical space, and we're still susceptible to attacks across borders. I mean, just look at Russia and Ukraine. They have all the greatest technology, new technologies almost in the world are being deployed on both sides, but war hasn't changed. And, so I think I would pose the question to you. What do you think has changed? I mean, you've named all sorts of gadgets that we have, but the belief in all the borders falling down, that belief goes back to antiquity. At the very least, we have to say that Montesquieu said explicitly that as far as traders and commercial people involved in commerce are concerned, there are no borders, and he said that 300 years ago. So I mean, the question is, what exactly do you think has changed that should affect a difference in our political or religious views?
I would say a number of factors. I think, for instance, if we think about the degree to which the car and mass mobility has changed our society, in a former society, you would expect for multiple generations of the norm would be multiple generations of a family growing up in the same locality and a sense of the importance of that place being preserved and passed on. Whereas I think the modern city has less of that sense, precisely because there's you're leaving your locality to strangers. You're going to move through several different localities within your lifetime, not just neighborhoods, but cities. And this is commonplace for many people. I think also in terms of the economy, whereas in the past, the nation could rise up to some business entity and hold them in check, that's less the case now. So even in the past, that rise of the nation into the stage of the empire seemed to follow in the wake of the almost imperialism of economic activity. If you think about the East India Company or something like that, the rise of the British Empire very much occurs in concert with the globalization of trade. And the more that trade extends and the more that it gives businesses a sort of power that is similar to and even greater than government, more intrusive in many contexts, government isn't necessarily a force that can compete with that without jumping up a level and becoming even more involved, even more international, whatever it is. And so I think just the scale of things, the speed of things. So for instance, if you think about mass communication, one of the things that happens with the speed in which changes occur within our society. In the past, you have a fairly stable form of life that changes gradually over generations. And so wisdom can really function with former generations, giving the patterns of life to the generations that follow. And I think now we're feeling something of the disorientation that the older generations feel when they see younger generations that are living within social environments and technological environments where so much of their existence is taking place in contexts that the parents have no idea about how to manage. And so I think there's something of a disruption of the channels of a healthy conservatism that require maybe somehow we have to engage with these forces and either rein them in or address them some other way.
Well, I definitely agree with you that the example of the family is a very powerful one, and I write about it in some detail in my new book on conservatism. The idea that that the family consists of a father and a mother and two or three children living alone in a detached house, and that every morning the father gets in a car or goes on a train, and this speaks directly to your technological question. Every morning the father will get on a train or in a car and drive a great distance to some kind of business center, and the children will get on buses and be taken off to school. And so there's this kind of division of labor where the mother is left in the house alone for the first time in human history to try to figure out how to make a home without the father or the children, without her parents, without brothers and sisters and other close relations, without a congregation of adopted family. That 1950s idea of what the family is, what was in fact devastating. And I don't at all really blame mothers who found themselves in that situation from deciding that they wanted a career of their own and that they would leave the house, and then the house is left basically an empty shell in which people come and sleep together, or not even together. So they come to sleep in the same home. Maybe they have dinner together, but probably not. That's not that image of the nuclear family is not conservative. Is the destruction of everything that the family used to be. The family used to be primarily a business enterprise in which parents and children worked together, and the children had respect for their parents because they could see their productive capabilities, not only their abstract wisdom and knowledge in math, but their ability to do things. And the children would gain status in the family and in the neighborhood by working in the family business, so that even if they moved away and started a different business, as you said, they didn't move very far away. And those are conditions in which human beings are capable of being healthy. And it is certainly affected by technology, but I think that primarily it's affected by ideology, meaning that I don't think it's no longer possible for people for children to stay in some proximity with their parents, and to take care of their parents in old age rather than sending them to nursing homes. And all of the rest that we could imagine would be better if there weren't all of this the shattering of the family at the age of 18 or 20 when the children go off to college and never come back again. But I have to emphasize that shattering is an ideological shattering before it's a technological shattering. The writings of Enlightenment rationalists, people like Locke and Rousseau, are absolutely clear that the children become the equals of the parents at the age of 18 or 20, and at that point they don't owe them anything anymore. And that belief is a belief that has been encouraged. It's a kind of religion. It's a kind of ideology, and it goes hand in hand with the technological features that you're describing, I think.
Yeah. So let me ask on this thread, because I think it comes close to some of my questions about conservatism more broadly. It seems like there's a kind of self-conscious, there's something weird that happens when people get together and try to self-consciously preserve the past, because there's a question about whether or not what they're preserving is what they should be preserving. So, for instance, in American politics, within the religious right, which shows up, from what I can tell, very little in your book, if at all, despite having pretty significant impact on the nature of American conservatism over the last 40 years, the religious right focused on the family, right? They really invested a lot in preserving this particular model, this very granular nuclear family centric model, despite the fact that, as you say, it is a kind of historical aberration. And it's a historical aberration that's partly shaped by ideology, but also shaped by market forces and technology and all these things. And that self-conscious preservation of this particular time slice gets baked into sort of what it means to be a social conservative within America within a particular time slice. I guess what I wonder is, how can conservatives avoid historicism in their approach to the world? Like a historicism that's actually the mirror image of a kind of progressive historicism? And how can they respond to when bad things get built into what we have received and are passing on? You know, we just have to like ask about race at this particular juncture. I say I would, you know, prior to 2016, I think I would have been extremely sympathetic to this. I would have just eaten this up entirely. But 2016, you know, I have someone who was a donor to conservative organizations on my front porch during that time who's tells me straight up that they think that Black Americans don't really have a home within American conservatism because there's something about their culture that just doesn't fit, which to me is just noxious and abhorrent, right? And it seems like one thing that American liberalism provides or supplies is real, genuine uplift for African American communities within America, that really was resisted by significant swaths of the conservative tradition. So I guess I like, this is partly why I can only give at this point in my life a kind of two cheers for conservatism, because it does seem like really bad things get baked in, and we can't be historicists. So we have to turn to something else besides what we've received in order to know how to move forward in this world.
Well, look, first of all, I'm kind of disappointed that you didn't come and talk to me before 2016, because it seems we could have had a really productive conversation that would have saved you a lot of heartache. Look, look, the questions are completely reasonable, but I sort of feel like they're I mean, you're not the first person to ask them. I kind of feel like they're coming from a caricature of conservatism. Nobody claims, I don't know anybody who claims that any version of conservatism is capable of bringing us to utopia and solving all of our problems. And that is, in that way, conservatism is very, very different from liberalism and from Marxism, both of which make these universal claims about the abolition of all problems if you only hang on to their theories long enough. So look, I can't tell you that there aren't bad things baked in from the past. I can only tell you that our experience with Cartesian style scorched earth overthrowing everything we've inherited from the past because it's all ignorant nonsense. Our experience with that is just terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, the cultural revolution that is consuming America right now, what we've seen in the 1960s, we saw a bunch of well-meaning liberals who had seen the horrors of the world wars and the Holocaust and the continuation of the oppression and persecution of Blacks in America, and they said, that's it. We've had enough. We're going to adopt an Enlightenment liberal theory, which is completely clean of any reference to historic groups or nations or genders or anything else. That's going to become the basis of our government. And they proceeded first to ban Bible and God from the schools, and from there to challenge the idea of the family and the idea of the nation, and from there the idea of man and woman, and the consumption of this society just continues year after year. It gets worse, and I can't understand anybody who would look at that and say, you know what the problem is? The problem is our inherited traditions. I don't think our inherited traditions are the problem. I think our problem is that we're addicted to revolutionary solutions that do nothing but destroy. But let's go back to what liberalism has done for Black Americans. I don't have any doubt whatsoever that the impulse to make Blacks and whites equal in America, whether it was the impulse of Lincoln and Grant or the impulse of the 1960s, was just that the aim was moral and right. And nevertheless, looking back on it, I think that if you ask, have the 70 years of liberal hegemony made things better or worse for Blacks in America? I think it's surprising that there is a question. I mean, of course, Blacks are free to vote. They're free to pursue occupations. We don't have horrible segregation. All of those obstacles are down, and yet at the same time, when I talk to members of the Black community, they feel alienated from America. It's not just the conservatives that they're alienated from. They say that as a community, they're not honored. Their own religious traditions are not honored. I just don't see where's the happiness that liberalism brought to the Black community.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I'm not a perfectionist, and I don't think that a liberal needs to be a perfectionist. And I'm actually not really a liberal either. But any sort of you have to create utopia, that's what we're going for. That's not my view at all, for those of you who are listening, right? But the question is right, whether or not this particular ideology, namely conservatism, as it has been practiced and implemented, the philosophy, whether it actually had the resources internally to deal with what were in fact deep social injustices that had been built into the culture and traditions.
Well, of course it did. Who banned slavery? I mean,
right.
Who got rid of slavery? Slavery was eliminated from Britain centuries before any of centuries before it was imported into the United States.
Well, by liberals, though. I mean,
what are you talking? What liberals? There weren't any liberals. The earliest liberals you can name are in the 1600s. There were no slaves in England in the 1600s, or in the 1500s, or in the 1400s. There are no slaves. And the slaves were imported into England.
I see. Sorry. Yes, I thought you were talking about Wilberforce and company.
No. Well,
sorry, I misunderstood.
But the slaves were brought into England via the mercantile law. That was in the 17th century.
Sure.
And within some number of decades, Lord Mansfield had righted the ship and had said, look, the common law cannot sustain slavery. Period. So that there you're prior to the American Revolution, and within a few decades, then you get to Wilberforce and the Christian campaign to eradicate slavery completely.
Which to my understanding had a kind of liberalism, right? Like Gladstone, Wilberforce, they are like evangelicalism and evangelical politics is deeply compatible with a type of liberalism.
No. Evangelicalism is look, I'll tell you what type. Look, I've met a lot of Christians in the last 10 years since my Bible book came out. A lot of people have wanted to talk to me, and I didn't think I knew much about Christianity before they started talking to me. I probably still don't know a whole lot, but I can tell you the common denominator after 10 years of Christians coming and talking to me about their inability to pass their religion to their children is that the kind of religion, the kind of Christianity that is able to supposedly survive liberalism is the kind of Christianity that eliminates the Old Testament.
I agree.
That's it. Okay,
Yeah.
so if by Christianity you don't mean traditional historic Christianity for the last 2,000 years, but you mean let's take certain parts of the Gospels and certain parts of the Psalms and eliminate everything else that exists in the history of Scripture. If that's Christianity, then yes, liberals can be Christians for sure. But if you think that Christianity has something to do with the historic inheritance of the Jewish people and then the Christian nations that adapted and adopted Jewish theories to their own circumstances, then there is no way to reconcile that with liberalism, because liberalism says that every individual is free and equal by nature. Okay, and the Bible says that every individual is made in God's image, and it doesn't say anything about them being free or equal by nature. And so you have to invent some kind of a new capitulation in which Christianity gives priority to liberalism in order to be able to make them compatible. And that's exactly what we did. That's what was done in the 1960s, wasn't it?
Well, I think we might be talking past each other some. I mean, when I say evangelicalism, I've got a particular time slice and a particular movement in mind, which begins in England and has its own sort of manifestation here in the States. And I think, those are strong claims about both liberalism that I think are themselves can be questioned, and strong claims about what Christianity is compatible with, which I think can also be questioned. I mean, there's a certain type of freedom that we get by virtue of being created in the Imago Dei, and there's a certain type of equality that we have by virtue of being created in the Imago Dei. And I don't think anyone really disputes that. And the question is what sort of social and political form that takes. So I think there's lots here that we could sort of talk about. I do think we are talking past each other a little bit, though.
I'll
give you the last word.
Past each other, but I do find it difficult to understand. I don't understand the claim that Christianity and Judaism were incapable of understanding the meaning of Genesis for 3,000 years, up until suddenly Thomas Hobbes and John Locke opened up our eyes and made it clear to us what Christianity and Judaism really are about. I think that's I can't understand it. I don't understand why someone would want to go there.
Yeah, I definitely don't understand that either, and I don't think that's my claim. But we do want to respect your time. You've given us an hour, and I think that's all we had on the calendar. So I want to make sure that we honor that. Let me just ask in conclusion, Dr. Hazony, I really do like the project, and I'm more excited about national conservatism than I think anything I've seen on the conservative political landscape for a long time. How can, there's a lot of ferment on the right, intellectual ferment, and in my limited experience in this world, it seems like intellectual ferment on the right happens every time we're out of power. That this is a feature of what goes on once you lose the House, lose the presidency, et cetera. People start in the wilderness generating new ideas about what should go next. And I think that's really important, really fertile. How does this sort of movement, how does conservatism translate into governance going forward? Give us something optimistic, something hopeful that we can look forward to.
Okay, well, here's my hope. Look, I don't know if I can be optimistic because the problem is that the trajectory doesn't look good. The good news is that it doesn't really matter so much what the trajectory looks like, because we human beings are terrible at knowing what's actually going to happen. We project forward, we think we know what's going to happen, but nobody predicted the fall of the Soviet Union almost, and nobody predicted the housing bubble collapse, and nobody predicted the rise of nationalism 2016, and virtually nobody predicted that woke neo-Marxism would take over all of the major liberal institutions in 2020. So the good news is we don't actually know what's coming. And what that means is that we don't have to be optimistic and we don't have to be pessimistic. We have to be dedicated to the political and religious restoration where it's possible. Okay, so I'm not one of those people who's looking for the American Supreme Court to impose some kind of settlement on the 50 states. I think that that's a foolish aim, and I think it's just
no integralism. No Roman Catholic integralism state for you?
Well, look, every time I try to talk to somebody about integralism, they tell me that they're not integralists. So, and that includes all of the people who are called integralists in the media. So I find the subject difficult. And the truth is that group of people is in motion constantly, and I can't understand. I can't understand where they're going, and I can't understand where they've arrived. So that's what I have to say about that. But to go back to something that's somewhat optimistic, the decision in Dobbs proves that political activism in the direction of a religiously based moral insight is possible, even in America, even today. It's possible. It can happen. It can work. And I think that if you're talking about the strategic next step, the strategic next step is that those places that have Christian majorities or pro-Christian majorities, meaning people don't have to be Christians, they can be Jews or unaffiliated people who believe that the Christian moral sense is better than the competition, which is the woke Neo-Marxism. Where it's possible to build a coalition like that, states and localities should jettison the idea of separation of church and state. It was invented in 1947 and imposed by the national government on the states. It's been a disaster. You cannot send kids to school day after day without God or scripture and expect them to come out being believing Christians or Jews. It's absurd. So my suggestion is rally, put some wind in your sails after some of the recent surprise victories, rally around establishing decent, compassionate, tolerant, workable, excellent societies that are based on a public Christianity. There are states in the United States where that experiment is possible. Do the experiments and let's see if the Christians are going to build Ayatollah Iran like the liberals and the Marxists are claiming. We'll find out quickly enough. I don't actually think that's what's going to happen, but we'll see.
That's a fascinating word to end on for Alastair. I think we should probably keep going, Alastair and me as the resident monarchists on the show. We should probably just keep going and repent and submit to the Queen, which gives us good public Christianity in an institutionalized form.
Before you try to bring the monarchy back to the United States, I suggest trying to bring it back to Britain.
That's a good hard word. And on that note, Dr. Hazony, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the show. We've really enjoyed it. And for those of you who've been listening, we hope you've enjoyed this conversation. The book is Conservatism, a Rediscovery by Dr. Yoram Hazony. We'll link to that in the show notes at Mere Fidelity. We'll be back in the weeks to come with other conversations about faith, the world around us, and how to navigate it successfully. Until then, though, this has been Mere Fidelity.